good afternoon, Phil Cook. What a pleasure to have you joining us today. Want to welcome all of our RF family, our network of pastors and leaders, and those of you that will be joining us via live stream. What a pleasure we have today to have Dr. Phil Cook. Now, I want to refer to him as Dr. Phil. He might allow me to get a little bit more, casual and leisure with him. But for those of you that are not aware and you're having the pleasure of meeting him for the very first time, he is to, as Paul was to the Gentiles, as Peter was to the Jews, Phil is to Hollywood. God has sent him to Hollywood. He is the hardest working man in Hollywood. Not only that, he is probably the only producer, film director, and Hollywood type with a PhD in theology. All right, he established his business. He and his wife established their business back in 1991, if I'm not mistaken, right. Phil. And so you guys have been going at this thing for a long time. I've had the pleasure of sitting in some of your breakout sessions and seminars with Kingdom Momentum and to 12. You've been advising our leader, pastors and Hope Ron and their church through different transitions for a significant amount of time. And so you're not new to the Redemption family, but we have new pastors and people joining our fellowship all the time. So I want to give a formal introduction. I'm sure that your information, your insight, and your expertise is going to be introduction enough. However, we certainly want to celebrate you and your accomplishments and what you have meant to our leaders, Ron and Hope Carpenter, and want to welcome you to this webinar today. So I'm going to hand it off to you, right. And then we're going to follow up towards the end with some question and answers on behalf of those people that are joining us live.
Well, I'll tell you, that was a great introduction. I need you to travel with me and do that introduction everywhere I speak, because that's pretty powerful right there. I felt that anointing all the way here in LA. Let me just say that. It is fun. We have a company here called Cook Media Group, and we work with churches, ministry organizations, nonprofits, helping them use the media more effectively. And I do find it interesting working out of Hollywood that I'm trying to, you guys get it, I'm trying to get more pastors and ministry leaders to think of Hollywood as a mission field rather than the enemy. And so we're not going to change Hollywood until we pray for Hollywood, until we send missionaries out there to get into Hollywood and get into that system. But today I want to really focus on helping you as a pastor or a church leader understand what's happening in the media today. This pandemic has completely changed the equation of ministry for thousands and thousands and thousands of churches, not just here, but around the world. And we watch about 15 or 20 live streams every week. And we've been working with numerous churches on their live stream, helping them. And so over the years, even before the lockdown, but since then, I've been really tracking it. And I want to talk to you a little bit today, not just about the live stream, but about some things in the media that you need to understand. And Maurice and I talked this morning that I don't care if you pastor 20 people or 20,000 people, these principles will really be designed for you. It's interesting that before the lockdown, Lifeway research indicated that 41% of churches in America had never offered anything online. I mean, anything, not one thing, no resources, no services, no music, nothing online. But I'll tell you, when that lockdown happened in March of 2020, that dramatically changed the equation. And over the years, I've had pastors tell me, Phil, I don't mind live streaming my services, but I don't think that's real ministry. Well, let me tell you, those guys have completely changed their tune, and they've discovered that, I tell pastors right now, I love missions. I love education. I love Sunday school. I love teaching of all kinds. But the truth is, right now, your communication and media teams are what's keeping your church doors open. So finally, I think if anything good has come out of this virus, it's that pastors are starting to recognize the power of media, the power of communication, and why it happens. And I just came out with a book, as a matter of fact, called Maximize Your Influence: How to Make Digital Media Work for You, Your Church, and Your Ministry. It's really an interesting resource. It's kind of a reference book. I've designed it to be a reference book that deals with everything from social media to websites, to even speaking, teaching, preaching to a digital generation. Also PR, what happens if something terrible happens in our church? How do I respond? There's so many things in here, video, even how to get on television, how to publish books. The digital world has changed everything. It's interesting that Paul, the Apostle Paul, used the technology of his time to literally change the world. And that was letters. He used the technology of his time, which was letters, to get the gospel out. And then 500 years ago, Martin Luther, during the Reformation, really birthed the publishing industry as we know it today. And then today, the digital revolution is happening. And I honestly think the digital revolution will be much more significant than even the revolution of publishing books. So this is something you can go to my website at philcook.com. I'm Cook with an E, or you can go to influencematters.com and download it. If you'll give us a gift to our nonprofit organization, the Influence Lab, that helps teach and train Christians internationally to use the media, we'll send you a copy of the book. And I tell you, this needs to be on every pastor's desk, on every church leader's desk. Get it for pastors you know and the members of your team, because it'll really help you understand. It's not about building the websites or building your social media platform. This book is about why you need to do it and what you need to be saying and how you need to say it. So I think that's going to be really critical for you today. And I just want to start with some key principles that I think you need to understand about media in general. Maybe we'll go for 15, 20 minutes with that. And then I'll switch over to live streaming, because even though many of you are in places where you're coming out of this shutdown and people are starting to meet again, here in California, we still can't meet. We can meet with small groups outside, but it's really, really hard for churches here in California, and I know New York and some other places. But even if you're starting to meet again, this is not the time to let the gas up when it comes to your live stream. The live streaming moment here has changed everything about church that we know. And so we're never going to go back to the old way of doing things. But before we start on that, let me give you some key principles that I want you to understand about media in your church that are absolutely important. First thing, let me talk about your church website for a second. If you don't hear anything else I say today, listen to this. And I hope you're writing this stuff down. It's all in my book and more, but I'd love for you to write this down and start thinking about it immediately. So the first thing I want to talk about is your website, which is your website is not for church members. Listen to that very carefully. Your website should not be designed for church members. Trust me, your church members know where the church is. They know who the pastor is. They know when services start. They know when the Christmas pageant's coming up. Your church members never visit your website. But I can tell you this, I can guarantee that 99.9% of potential new visitors will check you out online before they visit. Which means if your website is for your church members, then it's not providing what you need for visitors. I'm going to tell you this, you need to completely rethink your church website and redesign it around what a potential visitor needs to know to get excited enough to come and visit your church. Now, here's the deal. If that's true, and it is, that people will check you out online, if that website becomes the tipping point for making them to decide whether or not to visit your church, your website ought to be the best thing you do. I know that's heretical in many cases, in many places, but your website is the single most important thing that will tip people over to help them decide to come to your church. So just rethink your website from this point on in terms of what is the information on there that I need to give them that will make them really feel a compelling case to come and visit our church. That's the thing you need to understand. Another thing I want you to understand is when you do live stream, that's only the beginning. That's only the beginning. If you're live streaming and you think you've got it in the bag, you're really wrong. I would encourage you to be connecting 2 or 3 times a week with your congregation. Now, there's a number of ways to do it. You can do it with Instagram Live. You can do it with Facebook Live. I like those 2 platforms because, as many of you know, the minute you go live, it sends a notification out to all your followers that you're on, and they're more likely to come and hear you. But that's a powerful way just to keep people updated during the week, particularly if you're in a place where everybody can't come back right now. That's so very important. So stay connected with people during the week. Another thing I would say is when it comes to social media, be really intentional about your social media. Now, here's what I mean by that. It's not just about throwing up quotes from the pastor or putting up video clips from the pastor or putting up scripture verses or things like that. Being intentional about social media means reaching out to people. Now, I'll give you a good example. Dave Adamson is a friend of mine who does social media for North Point Church for Andy Stanley in Atlanta. I interviewed him on my podcast recently, and Dave said something really interesting. He said, I don't just post information from us. He said, I actually look out there for what other people are posting. And he says, if I see someone post a hashtag like new in town or moving day, I'll reach out to that person and invite him to my church. I'll say, hey, I understand you're moving. Let me introduce myself. Let me invite you to the church. You can do a geographic search for Twitter posts, for Instagram posts, other social media posts on Facebook. And when people are using hashtags like that, that indicates, hey, maybe I should reach out to those people and visit them. He said, you have no idea How many people we have at North Point now that started coming here because I reached out to them on social media. He said even one guy in his community lost his dog. And he put a hashtag lost dog on his post, and Dave saw it and retweeted that on the church social media platforms. He said Andy got upset with him for using the church media platforms to help a guy find his dog. But guess what? A couple weeks later, the guy found his dog, and he tweeted and put out on all his social media platforms, hey, North Point Church helped me find my dog. That's the greatest church in Atlanta. And it started a whole conversation about that. So I'm just saying, don't just simply post what you think people want to hear. Reach out and hear what people are saying. Talk to them. And maybe the most important thing is to understand that social media is social. That means you don't just post and walk away. Now, you may be posting as a pastor. You may have a volunteer or a staff member that posts for you, or you may have a social media team. I don't know. But whatever you're doing, I would encourage you, don't just post and walk away. Get back in there and respond to people who respond to you. I'll tell you a Ron Carpenter story. Early on, many years ago, when we started working with Ron with social media, he was somebody that would post and just walk away. And he was posting great stuff, but he wasn't engaging people who were responding to him. So one day we were actually in his office, and I said, Ron, let's look at your Facebook page. And he had posted something just right then, and some lady responded to it. I said, hey, go back and talk to her, respond to her. And he did. And the next thing this lady posted was, oh my gosh, my pastor talks to me on social media. This is the greatest church I've ever been to. And she just went on in a rant about how awesome Ron Carpenter and the church was. So I would just encourage you, remember, social media is social. It's about starting conversations out there. So this doesn't mean you have to be on social media all day long and blow off your job as a pastor, but it just does mean occasionally. Now, I'll tell you a story I heard from a friend of mine in North Carolina, a pastor, who told me that he never responded to people, ever responded on social media. They would post for him and they would post for the church, but he would never respond. And he said, one day he called me and said, last week, a lady responded to one of my posts, and it was a theological question she had. And I just really felt led, maybe I should respond to that lady. So I did. First time I'd ever done that. He said, I responded to her. He said, well, lo and behold, that Sunday she came and visited the church. And he said, lo and behold, at the end of the service, she came forward and accepted Christ. And he said, but lo and behold, the next day I got a call that lady had been killed in a car accident. Now, he said, I don't want to sound cheesy and I don't want to over spiritualize this, but he said, I wonder what would have happened had I never reached out to that lady on social media and she never came to the church. So it's a powerful tool. It's far more powerful than you think. I use great examples in my book about how social media has reached people with the gospel, got them into churches, just completely changed their lives, put marriages back together. So it's a tool that if you use it strategically, it can really have an impact for you. The next thing I would say is now is the time to be advertising your church. You know, during a time of a pandemic, when things are difficult, and I know things are difficult and money is tight and we're worried about, how far our budget will go, most churches will hunker down and not do anything. I mean, very little, particularly when it comes to promoting what they do to people. But research indicates that companies who advertise during a crisis are the companies that do the best when they emerge from that crisis. Why is that? That's because other businesses aren't promoting themselves. They're not advertising. So the businesses that are actually get noticed by people, which means that in your community, chances are other churches aren't advertising very much, whether it's a newspaper ad or a radio spot or paid advertising on Facebook or some other social media platform. They're probably not doing that, and they're hunkering down, which means when you promote your church right now, when you advertise, you're getting noticed because other churches aren't doing it. The competition is gone away, which means that as people emerge from this crisis, your church is the name they're going to remember. So all I would say is whenever we're in a crisis, whether it's a financial crisis, whether it's this pandemic, whether it's something else, consider that to be a prime time to start promoting your work, start advertising the church, and get the word out there because other churches aren't doing it. And believe me, people are noticing your church, and they'll remember it when they emerge from the crisis. The last thing I would say in this little opening part is it goes beyond just advertising. One of the things I've discovered is that since the pandemic started in March of 2020, since the pandemic started, we've heard nothing on TV except there's a new normal. Things are going to change. We live in unprecedented times. Now, let me go back and tell you this. I wrote a book years ago called Jolt, Get the Jump on a World That's Constantly Changing. And I wrote that book to help people really navigate this time of accelerated change that people are in. I mean, we're having more change than we've ever experienced in our life. Research indicates that the average person sees about 10,000 media messages every single day. I saw a study yesterday that indicated that we touch our phone about 2,000 times a day. I mean, that's really remarkable when you think about it. The change, the technological change, the cultural change that's happening right now is just overwhelming for people. And we need to understand how to really navigate that. But one of the things I discovered is people hate change. And I'm sure if you're a pastor, a church leader, you know from dealing with your congregation, people just don't like to change. In fact, in that book, I showed an example that one study that indicated a significant number of open heart surgery patients within 2 years go back to their old lifestyle. I mean, the drinking, smoking, eating the wrong stuff, the same stuff that got them to that open heart surgery problem in the first place, they go right back to it because even the threat of death doesn't make most people change. They just hate it. But here's the deal. During this pandemic, since day one, all they've heard is there's a new normal. Things are going to change. Things are going to be different. They've had that pounded, all of us have had it pounded into our heads for the last 6, 8, 10 months. So we have to think now people are probably more open to change than at any time in your lifetime. Now, I know it's a bold statement, but I'm going to tell you something right now because people are so used to it. They're actually expecting that as we come out of the pandemic, change is going to happen and things are not going to be the same, which means as a church leader, if you ever wanted to change something about your church, this is the moment. Now, trust me, I know every pastor in America has something he wants to change about his church. That's just very, very common. So it could be any number of things. It could be the name of your church. It could be the branding, the logo design, the way you advertise. It could be your order of service. It could be your times of service. It could be changing out your leadership team, maybe moving people around, or maybe it's time to let somebody go. Whatever it is, this is your moment. And I would encourage you, do not wait. If you want to change anything about your church, from repainting the sanctuary to renaming the church, whatever it is, this is the time to do it, because you'll find people will accept it, or more likely to accept it right now than they've ever been in their whole life, and certainly in your life. So those are just some of the things right off the top I want to tell you. Now, let me take a deeper dive into live streaming. We don't have a whole lot of time here, but I want to point out some live streaming things, largely because, as I say, just because people are starting to come back into church doesn't mean we need to let up the gas when it comes to your live stream. We've had some remarkable stories, particularly from pastors who really engaged live streaming intentionally and has some amazing stories. And I want to give you some insights that I think will help you understand how to really raise the bar when it comes to your live stream and how to make it much more effective. Let me just run down and maybe give you 10 or 12 quick thoughts, and then we'll open it. Maurice and I'll do some Q&A and maybe answer some questions people have out there. The first thing I want you to think about is, when you think of your live stream, actually, when you think about anything digital, I talk a lot about that in my book, Maximize Your Influence. I talk a lot about the fact that it's not about duplication, it's about adaptation. Now that means, when I live and work in Hollywood, when I, as a producer, buy a book to make into a movie, I don't shoot the book. It would be a 99-hour movie. You just can't do it. You have to adapt that book into what would work for a movie. So you take out scenes, you arrange scenes, you take what we call creative license. You delete some stuff, all to make it work better as a movie. It's the same thing with a live stream. Just because of, you did church in your building doesn't necessarily mean everything you do has to be from there. So for these live streams, you may be like me right now. I'm sitting at a bistro table at a stool in my office. A lot of pastors have done it in their living room at their home. Others find another room that's a little more intimate and quiet in their church building, and they do their live stream from there. Don't feel like you have to be locked into the sanctuary when you do live streams or you do anything when it comes to digital media. It's really important to remember, think, adapt. What will work on that camera? It's interesting that over the last 6 months, when most churches had 100% of their congregation on the other side of that camera, it was interesting for me to see how pastors responded. I had one pastor I watched on a live stream that he was preaching up a storm, and then he'd go over here and preach like he's preaching to this crowd over here, and then he'd go over here like he's preaching to this crowd over here. And I thought, hey, there's nobody in your building. What are you doing? Don't fake it. Don't fake it. Everybody is right here, which means we need to get close because the story is in your face, your facial expressions, your emotions. This is where it's at. I know one church I watched recently that did the whole live stream on a huge wide shot. Well, you can't hardly even see the pastor's face. And I'm seeing the piano, I'm seeing potted plants, I'm seeing steps, I'm seeing all kind of stuff that I'm not interested in. I'm interested in that pastor and his message. So the way I'm framed right now in this teaching video is a good example of how you should be framing your message when it comes to your live stream. You don't need to be cutting away a whole lot. You need to be really focused on those people at home because that's where they are. And remember, by the way, it's important for another reason, and that is when they're in your home, when they're in your church, they can't escape. You kind of got them, when they're in the middle of an aisle and they got to fight 20 people to get out. They just can't get up and go have a cup of coffee in the middle of your message. But at home, there are no restrictions. They can go get coffee. They can go get a magazine. They can be eating breakfast. Let me tell you, it's a hostile audience out there. And so we have to think of everything we can to engage them. And that eye contact, that close-up shot is a real key part of that. And by the way, let me say in all this live streaming talk, there is no shame in being simple. You don't have to be Ron Carpenter and have 6 or 8 cameras and have thousands of people in your congregation. If you have 20 people, do it on Zoom. You don't have to do it strictly on Facebook or YouTube. You could do it any number of ways. I know one church that literally taped an iPhone to a board and set it up and shot their live stream that way. Whatever it takes, there's no shame in being simple. The shame is that we don't engage at all. That's the shame. So get in there and talk to them. It's very important. That means even with your short videos and when you engage people during the week, don't be afraid just to pick up your camera. It doesn't have to be a polished Hollywood production. Just get your phone and start recording and doing some stuff and sharing it with people, and they'll start responding. I would also say, in my experience, and we've worked with hundreds of churches on live streaming, there's no evidence whatsoever, even during this pandemic, that being live is better than pre-taping your service. I get a lot of questions from pastors about that. Should I pre-tape the service and just roll that in? It's all up to you. Some pastors are nervous about the Wi-Fi going out if they're live. They're worried about a light falling over or something weird happening, noise, what have you. But the truth is, if that's the way you feel, pre-shoot it, do it live, and just play it back on Sunday. And otherwise, my friend Benny Perez in church at Las Vegas, man, he loves the rush of being live. He just loves being live. He loves taking that chance. So do that if you feel like that. That's just as important. So it doesn't really matter. It's whatever's more comfortable for you. The other thing I would say is do what I would call a pre-service. You see this with some churches are getting it, others don't. Instead of a countdown clock, what we've discovered is a significant number of people will tune in 10, 15, even 20 minutes before your program starts because they want to make sure they're there. They want to make sure they have everything set up and everything's correct. They're at the right place. So instead of just putting a countdown clock up, minister to those people. I recommend getting a host. Maybe it's an associate pastor. Maybe it's a couple at the church. Maybe it's a really articulate gal, somebody that can kind of lead everybody in ministry time before the service actually starts. You can do prayer requests. He or she could give people updates about what's going on with the service, kind of getting them ready for the message that's coming, talk about things that are happening in the life of the church. There's any number of things. So instead of that 10 or 15 minutes that's just showing a countdown clock leading up to your service, start the service actually 10 or 15 minutes early and have a little pre-service going on that lets people really feel like they're a part of this and minister to those people. And along with that, let me say this, don't wait till the end of your live stream. And I believe this about churches too. Don't wait till the end of your live stream to take up the offering. And let me say a little bit about the offering thing here, because I know that's really difficult for a number of churches. I know people are struggling right now. They're not sure about their finances. A lot of people have lost jobs. So as a pastor, I get that it's hard to take up an offering. It's hard to ask for money in a live stream, even in church. But here's the thing. What I've discovered is the secret is not asking for money. The secret is casting a great vision of how your church is still in the battle out there, making a difference in your community and encouraging people to come alongside and partner with that vision. We had a situation in Los Angeles early in the pandemic, maybe a month in. We realized all these big churches around the city aren't using cleaning supplies. They're not using toilet paper. They're not using other paper supplies. So we called them. We called them all and said, hey, let's box all that stuff up And let me call the Salvation Army and have them send their big truck out, because they could use this stuff in their rehab centers and their homeless shelters, after school programs, all the things the Salvation Army is doing during this crisis. So we got these big churches to box all their cleaning supplies and paper supplies and stuff up. So the truck came out. But I also encourage the pastors, when that truck shows up, get a video camera out there, get a still photo camera out there, take pictures of them loading that stuff. And then in your service, in your live stream service the next Sunday, talk about how your church is out there making a difference in your community, working, partnering with the Salvation Army, making a difference. And let me tell you something, in every single case where churches did that, their offerings went up, their income went up. So I learned a valuable lesson about casting a vision about how your church is making a difference. You know people that you've ministered to during this time. You know people who are struggling, who have had victories, whatever. Tell those stories, and your church is more likely to partner. The last couple things I would say, I don't want to run out of too much time here, but the last couple things I would say is, one thing we've discovered during the live stream, and this may work even with your church service, is that live streaming wise, people are pretty transient during the worship and the music, which means they're tuning in, they're tuning out, they're not really getting settled, and they don't get really settled until the sermon begins, which means maybe we should consider pulling up the sermon, shortening the worship set, pulling up the sermon, and get people engaged sooner. Now, this is, on Christian television, I produced hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of Christian television programs over the years. And we know that people watch Christian television because they want to see the speaker. They want to see a Ron Carpenter. They want to see a Joel Osteen. They want to see somebody like that, Joyce Meyer, whoever. So we don't put much music on Christian television programs. It's kind of turning out to be similar in live streaming. However, with a live stream, we want that to be a church service. That's a worship service. So we do need to have some music and worship. However, I would encourage you that during this time, when you're still on live stream, maybe shorten that worship set, at least experiment and see. We have one church that cut their worship set down to 2 songs. Then they do the message. Then they have a 30-minute worship set at the end of the service for people that really dig that and enjoy that, can hang around and watch that. But they notice it's getting people engaged quicker in the live stream, which is really helpful for them. So it may not be you. I know some churches that, particularly Pentecostal, charismatic churches, some people really dig the worship so much that some churches have actually expanded that set a little bit. But kind of test. You can look at your analytics and see where people are tuning in and tuning out, and where you have the biggest audience during that time, and kind of experiment and engage and see where you think the best thing should be. I do think that's really, really important. And by the way, let me go back. I skipped one thing I wanted to say, and that was with the offering. When you think of your live stream audience, think of it as a stream, not a pond, which means it's constantly changing. On Christian television, we know that people tune in and out of most Christian TV shows about every 6 to 9 minutes, which means we have to really reiterate things. We have to tell them things over and over, because the people watching at the end weren't necessarily watching at the beginning, and the people watching at the beginning won't necessarily be there at the end. So I'm encouraging you in your live stream, maybe don't wait till the end of the program to take up the offering. At least say something about it early. Give people an opportunity to give. Show them the graphic of how they can give. Maybe do it even during the message once or twice, and then at the end. That way, people tuning in, no matter where they are, they're more likely to connect with you. And speaking of graphics, let me say that if you have the capability of doing, text graphics on the screen, research indicates that people remember 3 times as much information when you use graphics like that. So scriptures, sermon points, key things to remember, the ways people can give, your church website, all that information. I'd say rotate all that stuff through about every 6 to 9 minutes, because we want people that have tuned in or various times throughout. You're the same way. You know that during a football game, you're watching football or baseball, and if you tune in halfway through the game, you want to see the score. And so that's why they started leaving the score up there all the time. So I think that's a key thing to remember when we do Christian programming. And the last thing I would say, and maybe we'll open it up for a few questions, is that make sure you're leaving your program on to be archived so it can be played back 24/7. Now, here's where most churches most churches are live streaming on YouTube or on Facebook, or the Church Online program. Now, if you've never heard of that before, let me tell you, the Church Online program, you can go to churchonlineprogram.com. It was created by the guys at Life Church in Oklahoma City, and it's free. It's totally free, but you can download it, and that allows you to put your live stream on your church site. The great thing about that is that it doesn't just have the live stream, but it has the chat room, but it also has the YouVersion Bible. In case people are sitting at home without the Bible, they can still look at Bible references with the YouVersion Bible. You could put your sermon notes on there so people can follow along. If you share your sermon notes, if you like to with your congregation, you can use that. And here's what we found out. I would like to put my live stream on as many platforms as possible. So I tell pastors, put it on YouTube, put it on Facebook, and put it on the church online platform, because the church online platform sits on your website and it puts people in the environment of your church website, which is always a positive thing. Now, what you'll generally find is you'll get more people watching on YouTube and Facebook, but the people on your website that are watching will watch longer. They get more engaged and a little bit more intense and are more serious, and they will watch longer. So that's just something to think about. But the last thing maybe I should say is that reflects the fact that it's not how you want to reach people. It's how people want to reach you. So it's not that I decide I'm going to use Twitter and that's it, because that's how I want to reach people. Or I want to use it. I like Instagram, so I'm just going to use that. Or I just like YouTube, so I'm going to put my live stream. Forget that. It's about how they want to reach you. So I want my message out there everywhere. You should be on every popular social media platform you can. You should be on all those 3 platforms if you can with your live stream. Engaging people where they are is absolutely the key thing. So Maurice, how are we doing? Should we answer a few questions?
Sure, absolutely. And I'll tell you, Dr. Phil, do you mind if I call you Phil? If I call you Dr. Phil,
please do.
Associated with that part of Hollywood.
Please do.
How about that? All right, we don't want to get you confused with the other guy.
The evil Dr. Phil.
I'll tell you what, the information that you have shared today, Phil, has been incredible. I am sure that everyone that is watching this right now has been energized and enthused by what is going on. And one thing that I want to, let the audience know and to compliment you on is that Hollywood has mastered how to effectively engage people during the pandemic more than anyone else, is because you guys have had the opportunity to capture people without them being in a room for an hour and a half. Even movies now, I think statistically, are lasting longer. They're creating longer movies. And we've been trying to cut our church services to keep people engaged, while Hollywood must have tapped into something different because they're having longer movies and keeping people engaged. Yeah. So that being said, thank you for this insightful wisdom that you are offering, because now we are able to peer into how Hollywood has engaged the sensory realms of human beings. And now we have to implement those same things because we have no other choice, as you mentioned before. But now let's go back to the beginning of your conversation, if you don't mind. I want to ask the question. You talked about websites, and what you said was invaluable, because I've even been in conversations with our staff and with our tech team in terms of how we're going to, redo our website. Never, ever did it come up really, other than directions, what to wear, what can you expect to experience when you get here, making sure that we have that. That being said, however, you're saying that the primary driver in the development of our website should not be internal. It should be how we're going to reach people. So my first question to you is, what are some, and I know all of this has to be contextual in terms of where you are geographically, the way your church is structured, rural, metropolitan, what have you. Right. But what are some common key elements of a website you think every website probably needs to have to properly engage people on the outside?
That is a great question, Maurice. And let me give you a few thoughts that will help. Remember that most people will give you 4 to 8 seconds on your website, maybe less. So they need to find information quickly or they'll move on, which means that full page bio of the pastor's bio, forget it. It's short. Keep it short. There's a reason we call people web surfers, not web readers. They're not there to read a 2-page bio of the pastor. They just want something that's a paragraph or less. So first of all, keep everything easy to access on there. One of the things that's frustrated me during this pandemic shutdown was the number of churches that it's hard to find your live stream on your church website. I mean, I have to click 3 or 4 pages, or I have to really look, and I find it's a little tiny little button up there. Let me tell you, during this pandemic, put the live stream in a big giant button on your homepage or in a big frame. Make it easy to find. Don't make people search for your live stream. And it's the same thing with your donation button. Don't make it hard on people to donate. And just like I talked about being on YouTube and Facebook and other places, you should be able to accept donations on about any platform. Venmo, the Cash App, online. There's any number of ways. Make it easy for people to support what you're doing and make it easy for them to find stuff. So I would just, my thing, a website shouldn't be this giant reference compendium of everything in the world about your church and about your doctrinal beliefs. Your website is strictly like a flyer, like a brochure, to give people a quick idea of what is it about your church that would make me want to visit? Where's it located? Who's the pastor? What do y'all teach? Things like that are critical. Then I would also have a link to your church YouTube channel. Now, I would be putting, hopefully you're archiving your services on the YouTube channel. However, I would also suggest, if you have this capability as a pastor at your church, also create a channel for you. For Pastor Maurice, for instance, you take that channel about you and you just put your messages on there. Cut out the worship, cut out the music, cut out the announcements, cut out the other stuff, just because what we find is people generally, like Ron Carpenter is a great example. A lot of people want to hear Ron Carpenter's messages, but they don't want to go through all the worship and the music and the announcements and other stuff that happen in a service. So they want to go to, instead of going to the Redemption East channel, they'll now go to the Ron Carpenter channel where they just get his teaching and his messages. Most pastors are doing that now. So I would encourage you to think in those kind of terms and have those links on your church website so people can easily find your teaching and get there just within a click. So I would say try to make everything accessible within 1 or 2 clicks. Once you go beyond that, people will tend to give up and go somewhere else.
Absolutely. Now that's great information. Now let me ask you from a structural standpoint. Say now you melt the website down to 4 or 5 clicks. You get your clicks down to your YouTube channel, maybe a giving or donate button, your live stream or what have you. Now the posturing of those different channels. For example, I've got a daughter that's 22 years old. She went to our website once, and I think our website had a give button, it may be 4 different buttons. Yep. She thought the give button being at the top was too forward. Now, from your perspective, knowing that we're building these websites for individuals that are not born again, that might not know the importance of giving and all of that, is it better to maybe even, because perception is the ultimate reality to some degree. So what do you think about that in terms of even the placement of how we are seeking to get contributions from our church? Should it be up front? Should it be at the end? What are your thoughts?
That's a great point. That's a great point. And I think it may be more, instead of a placement problem, it might be a title problem. So instead of saying give, maybe we call partner and, partner or join the vision or something like that. Maybe we make it sound a little less financially direct to people. I like to give them the option because a lot of people still want to give. And once they see this stuff, they think, wow, this is a church. Maybe I want to start supporting that. So I want to have it there. But I think your daughter's got a great point. Maybe it's not about calling it the give button or the donate button. Maybe it's more about capture the vision or join a partnership or something like that. That wouldn't make it quite so stick out is a financial thing. That might be the start of the way to do it. But I'm not I don't know that I would hide the button. I just want to make it easy for people to find.
Okay, very good, very good. All right, there's more than one way to skin a cat, right? All right,
yeah,
now,
there is.
Let me ask you the next. You talked about the importance of a website. We went on down to social media and how important it is for us to connect on a regular basis. Now, you said that we need to have at least 2 to 3 engagements per week. Now, what should those engagements consist of? For example, a personal engagement of a pastor or some people outside just doing something that is very, very personal, as well as the recasting of a service. What do you think that those 2 to 3 engagements per week should consist of?
Great question. First of all, the 2 or 3 engagements, I'm primarily talking about ways that you can follow up the live stream with a live interview video. When it comes generally to social media, here's what I'd recommend. Remember, your church platforms, your church social media platforms are largely megaphones. They're used for announcing the Christmas pageant or talking about summer school or Sunday school or vacation Bible school, or we're starting a new sermon series this week, whatever. They're largely megaphones. But the truth is, people like to follow people. So while they may follow your church site just to kind of stay up to date on what's going on, They really want to follow you as a pastor or a leader. And they want to know what is going on in your life. I've discovered the single biggest reason people follow you on social media is they want to know what it's like to be you. I mean, think of it. Ron Carpenter is a great example. In a church of his size, people just can't call him up out of the blue and say, hey, Pastor Ron, let's meet at Starbucks. I'd love to have a coffee with you and talk. He can't do that. There's just too many people. And even if you pastors, if you have more than 100 people, that gets difficult. But through social media, you can have a relationship with them and give them some glimpse of what your life is like. Now, here's the thing. You don't have to give away secrets or be super intimate, but I would love to know, instead of you saying, today's the day the Lord hath made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. I don't need to hear that. I love scripture, but there's millions of those guys saying that out there. What I'd rather hear is I'd rather see a post about what you're struggling with when you're developing a new sermon series, what you're going through, what are your victories, what are your frustrations, what are the obstacles you're facing. I'd love to know what your thoughts are before you walk out on stage to do the funeral of a longtime church member that you've loved for many years. What are you thinking about? What's going on in your life? If you look at many church leaders, they're really good at just sharing details about what's going on. Now, they'll still say Bible verses, or they'll say encouraging words or great quotes. But I also would suggest get on, and I would love to see you do this 2 or 3 times a day and just share with people what's going on. Now, it could be text, it could be a little short video, and you don't have to always do it. Maybe you have a team that can help you get those kinds of things out there. But I do think people love you. I think pastors don't realize just how much people love to hear from their pastor, and they love to have that kind of relationship. And I would encourage, by the way, other leaders in your church to do the same thing. So an executive pastor, you know what? Everybody knows you're an executive pastor at this church. Maybe you should use your social media to start sharing the gospel from that perspective. Maybe you're the worship leader. Maybe you're the communications director. I encourage those guys to get on social media as well. Now, it means you can still have family and fun stuff on your social media. However, it also means you have to think twice before you post certain things. One pastor, for instance, he and his wife went on a well-deserved vacation in Hawaii. I knew them well. They went to Hawaii and they were posting some pictures on social media out by the pool. And it was great. They were having fun. It was really cute. But then I noticed way in the back is the pool bar. And so in all their pictures behind them is liquor bottles lined up. And I'm thinking, maybe this is not the shot I want, hundreds of people to see out there. So I texted them real quick and I said, I'd pull those down and maybe post some other shots instead, which they did. So you got to think about little things like that because it does reflect on the church. And I can't tell you how many great leaders have been brought down because they said something stupid or did something stupid on social media. So we have to really think about what we're doing to present the gospel in a positive light. I encourage you, politics are great. I encourage people to vote, get involved in politics. But I don't know if you as a pastor want to lean to one particular party, want to get too involved in that. Maybe you want to kind of stay middle of the road. There's all kind of considerations like that. So whatever you feel led to do. But in social media, sometimes they can backfire.
Okay, now, Phil. Now, to the pastor, say there's a pastor that is watching today that they are trying to toe the line between self-promotion and being relevant. You having the experience of being in Hollywood, as well as the theological degree, we know we humble ourselves on the mighty hand of God. In due season, he'll exalt us. How do we balance that for the pastor that is struggling? Darn, I don't really want to self-promote, but I want to remain relevant. What is your advice to them?
Yeah, that's a great question too. And I have to admit, let me tell you a secret. We have a term we call underbragging, which pastors that don't want to overtly brag about themselves will say, praise God. They'll post on social media, praise God, we had 1,000 cars in the parking lot today. People are really responding to the gospel message. Well, that's really patting themselves in the back. So we have to kind of be sensitive about that. And I know some young pastors, it appears to me that they have a professional photographer that just follows them around 24/7 because they're constantly posting these amazing pictures of themselves. I don't know how in the world they get those things. But I think the important thing is it's not about you. The rule that we generally follow is for every post or two about you, post 8 posts about something else. So it's by that 2 to 10 rule. For every 10 posts you do, only 1 or 2 should be about you. And I mean you directly in that I was doing this today, or my family did this today. The others can be about our church, our ministry, the impact you're having. I can post about my new book. And I don't think people think, oh, he's being an egomaniac, because I just finished this new book and I want people to have it. So it's okay to share about my new book. So things that you're accomplishing, ministries you're doing, talk that up. I think that's really, really critical. But I wouldn't overtly talk about myself more than maybe one or two posts in a typical, out of 10 or so. Then beyond that, it starts getting a little egotistical, I think.
Okay. Phil, now we know that any successful business, by and large, has different budget line items. Now, that being said, do you believe that because of the pandemic, we might not be spending as much money with cleaning supplies and all of that? And should we move that over to purchasing advertisements online or social media advertisements? What are your thoughts on buying ads? Is that worth the budget? And if so, which ones would you suggest that we purchase?
Well, everybody's going through a different thing right now, and it depends on where your budget is and where your financial, where your pain is. But that's a great idea. If you can divert some of your, you're exactly right. There's a lot of things you're not spending money on. A lot of churches have furloughed some of their staff. And so if you have some money you could spend on advertising and promotion, this would be a great time to do it. Or spend it on rethinking your website, rethinking your online presence. This would be a really, really good time to do it. I think that it just kind of depends. I don't want to make pastors who are struggling financially feel obligated to go out there and take a newspaper ad out. However, if there's a way you can pull that off, I would certainly try it. One of the things I think that I've been so gratified by and I just really love is pastors who have really engaged their audience. Now, here's the thing. I know churches, even before the shutdown, who were serious about their online audience. And even before the shutdown, they were so intentional about welcoming them to the service, about engaging with them, treating them just like the live people in front of the pastor, that I can name you multiple churches that were making a third of their total financial income just from their live stream audience. So, in fact, I know a pastor in Oklahoma City. He pastors to 700 people in church, but he's got 10,000 people that watch him every week on live stream. And this was before the pandemic, before the shutdown. But since the shutdown, I think more pastors have really caught that vision. I got an email. I'll read you a short email I got from an old-time friend in Montgomery, Alabama, Kyle Searcy, a Fresh Anointing House of Worship. It's a church of about 900 people. Great pastor. And he really, the minute the shutdown happened, he latched on to online and he really took it seriously. And he sent me an email about a month or two into the shutdown and said, when this crisis started, I only had 82 YouTube subscribers at our church. Today, we have 23,000 YouTube subscribers. He said 1.5 million people have seen my Easter message. And he said, every Sunday, we're getting 30 to 40,000 people watching our live stream. He said, as a pastor, I feel guilty saying this, but I have no real desire to go back to the building. He said, we're making a greater impact in our community online than we've ever made in the history of our church. So guys like that are really embracing it are seeing some remarkable results. So maybe I would just encourage you guys to think, what can I do that will help engage with people more online? And until they're coming back into your service, see, here's the thing. It's not what, it's not what the law says about this end of this pandemic or what the vaccine, when the vaccine comes out or the rules, those regulations and stuff. It's really ultimately about when people feel comfortable coming back to a gathering in your church. So this could go on for a while. It may be a while. And I also am seeing, might be worth mentioning, Maurice, that my estimation is we're going to see a certain percentage of people not stop coming to church when this is over, but maybe they'll cut their church attendance back 1 or 2 Sundays a month. Maybe they'll go to church 2, 3 Sundays a month, but they'll stay home for that 4th Sunday. Maybe they'll stay home the 3rd and 4th Sunday. I don't know. They're getting used to this. So I think we do not want to let up on our live stream, even when we're fully back in the building, when the vaccine is here. I think hopefully God has really shown us, given us this moment to realize that this live stream is a legitimate, serious thing, and we need to actually reach out and take advantage.
Absolutely. And we're coming down to the final wire, if you will, the time that we have together. And so there are other questions I'm sure that I'd have. I think I'll ask you one additional question. Maybe we can do a follow-up on how to create a hybrid model, meaning how
Great.
to maintain the relevance of online while we actually are headed back to the building, because there are going to be some adjustments that we have to make when we get back to
That's true.
bridge the two, because we'll still have our viewers online that are more accustomed to a streamlined
Yeah.
approach to doing ministry. So we have to even figure out how we're going to do that again once we get back. And maybe that's a conversation for another moment. But now, so the
Fantastic.
last question will be, as it relates to the live stream, because we only have a few moments to capture someone, because people are flipping, they're logging on at different times. What if you mentioned cutting the worship potentially, and but now as it relates to trying different approaches, and you mentioned analytics as well. We can check the analytics, see which one is working. When we try different approaches to the flows of service, whether we do the offering in the middle at the beginning,
Yeah.
or the worship, a portion at the beginning and a portion at the end, how long should we stay with a different approach that we are going to take, but to really capture the analytics? Should it be a month?
Yeah.
Should it be a quarter? So that we're not moving around because we don't think we're getting the action that we need, or we're not getting the numbers that we need, but maybe we didn't try it long enough. What are your
Yeah.
thoughts on that?
Well, in television and broadcast TV, we'd wait for months to get it back. But with live online stuff, we know pretty much immediately. I mean, after the service, your web person or your tech person should be able to give you a chart of what actually happened during that service. So you should know pretty quickly. Also, you feel it in your gut. I mean, at some point, I think the Lord will show you, or you'll feel in your gut. One of the things I would suggest you really become hardcore about are dead spots in the live stream. For instance, when you transition from the worship to the pastor, make it quick. When you transition from maybe a greeting, somebody opening the live stream with a greeting or a prayer, and you go into the worship, make it quick. Don't just have a dead spot where people and musicians are setting up and getting ready. Trust me, you'll lose droves of people the minute you have a few seconds of dead space in there. So talk to your team about how do we tighten up our live stream to make it effective as possible. But I think you can know pretty quick. I'd try it a week, maybe 2 weeks. By the end of that, you're going to know if that thing has worked. And here's the thing, there are no hard and fast rules. Let's just experiment. Let's become a research and development department in our church and try out some new things, because you know what? This has never happened before. We have no benchmarks. We have no comparison. So what works is ultimately what's going to work for you. So let's give it a shot and see what happens.
Absolutely. Well, I'll tell you what, Phil, I have 1,000 more questions that I would love to pick your brain on. But on behalf of Pastor Ron and Pastor Hope and the entire Redemption Fellowship family, we are so thankful to have you sharing this insightful information with us this afternoon. This is going to go out to a lot of pastors. It's going to be incredibly helpful. And so thank you for spending the time with us today.
Thank you, Maurice. And by the way, everybody can maybe, if you want to find out more of this stuff, my blog is philcook.com, COOKE, philcook.com. You can find all this stuff. I have podcasts on iTunes and YouTube. Anything I can share with you guys that would help, Maurice can get word to me. We just want to see you guys succeed and do well in this digital age we live in. So thanks so much for the opportunity.
Absolutely. Well, Redemption, you guys, I'm sure you guys have been blessed. Redemption Fellowship, while everything that has been said today, take this information, apply it, and let's continue to grow. All right. Love you guys, and we'll see you soon.